Problem 13. 5 friends sat in a movie theater in a row containing 5 seats, numbered 1 to 5 from left to right. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. During the movie, Ada went to the lobby to get some popcorn. When she returned, she found that Bea had moved 2 seats to the right, Ceci had moved 1 seat to the left, and Dee and Eddie had switched seats, leaving an end seat for Ada. In which seat had Ada been sitting before she got up? And so consider that after Ada got up, what happens? What happens is that there's one empty space, right? For example, 2. And then they rearrange themselves. But let's first consider the given criteria. We know that when she returned, she found that Bea had moved 2 seats to the right. So she must have moved 2 seats, which means that this slot cannot be Bea, this cannot be Bea. And so there's 5 friends, right? There's A, B, C, D, and E, right? And we know that, just to repeat myself, what? She found that Bea had moved 2 seats to the right. So this cannot be B, and this cannot be B. Ceci had moved 1 seat to the left. And so this seat, right, this cannot be where Ceci is sitting, right? Because then she'll, be not within the row. Dee and Eddie have switched their seats. So with this, that doesn't really help us. What we do know is that this is going to be the probabilities for the original selections, right? For the original seating chart. And so which seat had Ada been sitting? But one other criteria is that when she got back, 1 seat was left open, right? And if Bea were to move 2 seats to the right, Bea can never occupy the 5th seat. So that means this cannot be Bea either. So now we just basically have to simulate it out, which is to say, let's first assume that Ada has sat in the 1st seat. If Ada had, let's say Ada sat in the 1st seat, would this make sense? Well, let me just write it to the side. Bea moves 2 seats to the right, and Ceci moves 1 seat to the left, and then D and E swap places. And so let's say A was here, then afterwards, the seating would be like this, where this is empty. So that means Bea, let's say Bea was here. Bea moved 2 seats to the right. So Bea is now here. And then Ceci, let's say Ceci moved here. Ceci was here. Then she moved 1 seat to the right. And so originally the seating, originally the seating was this and this. But then afterwards, it became, and then therefore this would be D and E, right? Afterwards, Bea would have occupied, that would be impossible, right? Because Bea cannot take the seat of D. So that won't be a valid solution. So we have to say that basically D and E cannot be after B, right? Because if it's after B, then B, when he moves, he will take the slot of D or C, which is impossible if they just simply switch sides. So let's say Ada was here. If Ada was here, then basically we have to say is that, well, B can never occupy any of these 3 seats, right? B can only occupy here. But then that means that D, right? D and E would have to go here, which is impossible because C has to move to the left too, and they cannot take D's spot. So Ada can never have been in the 1st slot. That would have been physically impossible from the criteria that we just know. So therefore, the first choice gets eliminated. And you see where this is going. It's kind of like simulation and keeping track of the simulations that you do. And so let's move on to the second case where Ada is in the 2nd seat. If Ada were to be in the 2nd seat, which we will consider right here, then what can we say? We can say that the original seating chart we had to simulate it. This is now empty. Bea has to move 2 seats to the right, and so this would be valid, right? And then what? And then C can be right here. That's usually be A. So D and E will go right here. But that's impossible because B has to go 2 seats to the left, 2 seats to the right. And so it cannot occupy here. So and C cannot be right here. So so this is actually another impossible case, right? Because Bea can move here, but then this has to be D or E if C is here. If C is here, then C will move to the left, which is impossible. Or then again, actually, it might not be impossible, because what if C sat here, right? Then C would have moved, right? C would have moved where? C would have moved to the empty seat, right? And then Bea would have moved 2 seats, right, to the right. And then, therefore, she would now occupy the seat that Cecily once took. But D and E would have to go right here, right? Because remember, the original slots, the original. And so what does that help us with? Well, D and E were to be right here, and then they swapped, which would make sense, and then D and E swaps to get E and D. And so Ada would have sat here. And that would have been a valid combination given the criteria. And so that must mean that Ada in which seat had Ada been sitting before she got up? Well, 2 must be the correct answer from our simulation.